more, family. Come on, guys. Come on and join. My name is Hope Dims. I'm the host of Hope More, and that's lowercase HOPE, uppercase MORE, because you only need a little bit of hope to want more out of life. And in October, we're doing the STOPtober train, the STOPtober. And it's a play on the idea that there's a lot of things that make us scary. You know, Halloween is approaching and people are going to haunted houses, but don't you know, in your own house or your neighbor's house or someone you know, there's some really scary things happening in that home that has nothing to do with ghosts and goblins, right? It may be an issue of abuse going on in homes. So, or abuse going on in relationships, or abuse and stalking going on between people who are at work or old relationships. So that's why in the month of October, we're doing STOPtober and discussing the issues of violence, abuse, and harassment that happens in our homes or in our surroundings every day. So please, please, please go ahead and get on your Facebook. And please, please, please like this page, share it with a group page that you may be on, but just make sure you're going by the rules. Also, if you are on YouTube and you're one of my YouTube subscribers, would you please like and share the page, and also hit that bell and subscribe so that when I come on live, you are told that I'm on and you can join us. And I want you to join in this conversation. So I'm going to share right now to my Facebook page. Yes. And we really want people to participate, because in this STOPtober, it may not be you that need this information. Hopefully it's not majority of my audience, but the truth is, according to statistics, there's majority of this audience knows someone who's going through some type of trauma due to abuse and violence. Then there are more people who do know someone who's going through that than don't, or will experience someone or themselves experience it in the future if they have not already. So this is really good information. So like, and share. Come on, come on. I see you. Thank you for watching. And I want you also in this particular series, regardless if you're watching live now or coming back on a replay, we want to hear from you. There are a lot of comments that have come after the last show last week that dealt with sexual violence that helps inform me for the new show. And then next week, we're doing a focus on dating violence in particular. And then our last show is on stalking, which is another form of violence. And I am really excited to hear from all of you. So please share any questions or comments regarding domestic violence in the comment box. If you've been a victim, if you want to share your story, please share, because this is a community that we are forming and building. So today I have an amazing guest. Last week, we were blessed to talk to Michaela, a survivor of sexual violence, and she also shared some really good information as she is also a sexual violence advocate and provides counseling with Refuge House here in Florida. And so today, you will not be disappointed. I have this beautiful, wonderful woman that I've worked with for the last few years, Pamela Moore. She's also a survivor of domestic violence, but not only that, she's taken her experience and her passion to help other people. So I want to give her a Hope More family round of applause. Come on, let me hear it in the atmosphere. Yes, yes, yes. Let's bring her on, Miss Pamela Moore. Hi, darling. How are you?
Hello, Hope. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you
I'm
for
very
inviting me.
excited to have you here, because this is a special month, right?
Yes, it's National Domestic Violence Month,
Wow.
and there's a lot of things going on. I'm wearing my purple today to support National Domestic Violence Month, and it's just a way to acknowledge what we do, and also the survivors out there who are still needing our help, and the ones that have already gotten our help and are out of those domestic violence situations. So thank you again for having me here.
No, it is my pleasure. It is my pleasure. I'm sporting my purple too, my purple frames. For this is a really big deal. But before we get into the nitty gritty, Pam, could you just share a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to my Hope More family.
Well, my name, like she said, is Pamela Moore. I'm the domestic violence advocate for Madison and Taylor County. And I've been working with Refuge House for 3 years plus, I think. Well, going on 4 years now. And it's been real exciting. It's been all of, I've experienced pretty much every emotion that I could dealing with some of our survivors, and I've had to call my supervisor and vent to her about some things and just, you want to be everything to everybody, but you can't all the time. But I'm glad to say that we provide not only domestic violence counseling and resources and services, but the sexual violence, which you spoke about earlier. So that's
Wow.
me.
Pam, and she's also a wonderful mom, and she's a lifelong resident in the Big Bend area. So one of the great things about working for Refuge House in particular is that we cover, I think, is it 8 counties that include Leon and a number of places. But we're very committed in understanding our communities, right? And the types of
Yes,
cultural forces that go into people, what they understand about domestic violence, what kind of resources are available,
right,
because in small communities, maybe that's much different than big cities. People all feel like they know each other, so at times people are less likely to come forward in a small community because
right,
the judge may be your husband's cousin and the police officer may be your next door neighbor. So because of that, there are certain things that I think is really special about Refuge House and our focus, especially in Taylor and Madison, Jefferson County, which I help work as an injunction attorney. So we're going to get in that. Thank you so much. What drove you to take an interest in domestic violence?
well, when I first saw the ad, I was online looking for another job, and I had worked with, pretty much kids majority of my career. Um, we touched a little on domestic violence, and I've worked in the mental health field as well, and also ran into a lot of domestic violence situations during my employment with those agencies.
Okay.
So what led me, I've also experienced domestic violence, so it's kind of dear to my heart. Um, Growing up uh, in a family that, well, I thought that we weren't functional because I grew up in a household where I had two houses growing up. My mom and dad was together, but they didn't live together. And
Okay.
so I had two houses growing up, two bedrooms growing up. And then, so I rarely saw my parents get into what we perceived as a domestic violence situation back then.
Right.
But in arguing and financial um, abuse is domestic violence. But
Ah,
I didn't know that growing up. And so I've also educated myself a lot on domestic violence throughout the years and being able to bring what I know about domestic violence to my job and the work that I do helps when I'm dealing with survivors.
I love that.
Um,
I
mhm.
love that. And you're basically also getting into my next point. Just for those who have never really like took a beat to know what domestic violence is, as you noted, domestic violence may not come in the form that we most know about, right? I was talking to you earlier about different famous domestic violence cases we've heard about, right?
Mhm.
OJ Simpson and Nicole Simpson, whether or not you believe he murdered her or not, there were phone calls. There was a history of bruising, so we know about that. In fact, a lot of the federal funding that helps us comes from the movement that happened after that case.
Right.
Let's see who else. Chris and Rihanna, even though I would argue that's dating violence, but the bruising, or I was talking about Phil Hartman with you, who used to be, for all you old heads, used to be the host of Family Feud, much beloved. He was killed by his wife. Most recently, that there was a couple, Jennifer and Sarah Hart, who I think adopted or fostered a number of children, like 5 or 6, and some of them escaped and would knock on neighbors' doors. It's like, she's not feeding us, she won't let us out, and they were ignored. And anytime it came up, particularly because they were a lesbian couple, I think agencies may have been nervous and didn't want to seem homophobic, so they would be slow to accuse, and those people would get up and move to another state. And then back in 2018, I think it was, the moms drove all those kids off a cliff, including themselves. So we hear about those stories, right? And we're like, oh, that's domestic violence. Another famous one that I think is a little different is that mother, what was her name? Dee Blanchard. She had the daughter Gypsy Rose, and she falsely treated her as if she had all these disabilities, and that is abuse. Is abuse. And unfortunately, Gypsy, when she got a boyfriend, they killed the mother. So those things were like, yes, that's domestic violence. But as you noted, and we'll talk a little bit about, domestic violence doesn't always result in physical injury. There's emotional injury, there's financial injury, and sometimes those injuries are more traumatic and long-lasting than a slap in the face, in which I definitely have noted when it comes to providing legal representation to my clients. It's often the mental and the control that happens. So I shared with Pam, like, a broad definition for those who may need one. Domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical battery, emotional abuse, and or other abusive behavior as part of a systematic pattern of power and control. You're going to hear that more and more: power and control perpetrated by a household member. I describe it that way because another phrase often attached to domestic violence, right, is intimate partner violence. And that is correct in many ways, and different states have different definitions. But in this particular session, we're going to be talking about domestic violence as a part of someone's family or household, or a group of people who live together as a family. Although in the state of Florida, even if you don't live together, say if you share a child, again, family, that could be domestic violence. And I just wanted to note, for those, especially since most of my audience is in Florida, the domestic violence that is championed by the law enforcement, or even in civil injunctions and restraining orders like I do, is much more limited. They respond to the domestic violence, meaning any assault, battery, false imprisonment, stalking, or other criminal offense resulting in physical injury or threat of injury by a household or family member. Why do I mention that? Because like last week with sexual violence, every action of domestic violence is not necessarily a crime that can be punished, but it is in fact traumatic. I think, and I'm going to have Pam speak to this, it seems like the core, and you tell me if I'm wrong, of domestic violence is power and control.
Absolutely.
About power and control. Could you explain what makes that, like, versus like the idea of injury, that domestic violence is about centrally someone having power over you and someone controlling you?
Well, it's just like you said, with power and control, the perpetrator usually gain that over a period of time. It doesn't happen all at once. Although you may see some warning signs, we call them red flags, in that honeymoon period, you seeing butterflies and hearts and stuff. You're not really paying attention to the red flags right away. It's when things kind of calm down on that, the butterflies kind of fly away a little bit. And then you see things, but then they progressively get worse and worse. The power and control, it may start off as jealousy, you know. And at first, a lot of people think, in relationships, women, in general think it's cute that a man is a little jealous, because for a lot of victims, when talking with them, it's cute, that it to them at that time it meant that, oh, he cares about me, he loves me,
Yeah.
and so they kind of let it go and not address it, um, until it gets worse and worse and worse. And so now you got, it's very visible, because now they've went through the process of separating you from your support systems, which could
Mm.
be family members and friends that are there for you. They and like I had mentioned to you earlier, um, I've had clients who had lucrative careers prior to meeting their abuser. And once they met their abuser and decided they wanted to settle down, the abuser convinced them to quit their job, their career. And, with the want of wanting to start a family and have kids, that American dream, the house, the husband, the house, the kids, the car, and stuff like that. The husband tell them, I don't want you to work, you stay home, you take care of the house and the kids. And some of them go for that, and so they forget about their careers, they forget about, they over a period of time they forget about themselves, because they're so busy taking care of the abuser and the kids, the house, and then when the abuser don't get his way, he like you said, it can be physical. He may start becoming physical with them, verbal, um, controlling the money. You know, and when we talk about controlling the money, we're not talking about, you know, her going out overspending on, things that we're talking about needs, where they take money away from them, for food and, clothing and stuff that, she and the kids need. So in order to get those things, a lot of times the female will give in to their abuser and do what he says. And then, like I said, over time it gets worse and worse. And when it becomes physical, we talk about that power and control, and also that revolving cycle of abuse. It starts verbal, the arguments start, then it progressed to hitting and punching, and then, after they've realized what they've done, or this, the cops may get called out, maybe some light consequences. Then there's this honeymoon period. They enter into, they're begging them for forgiveness. They're ask, you know, they're telling them, they're not going to do it anymore. They're crying. Some of them even agree to go to counseling, just to convince their victims that they are wanting to change that behavior, and that they're serious about not repeating that cycle. But 9 times out of 10, it starts all over again. And like I said, it gets worse and worse and worse. And then, and then you got the family. The families are also traumatized by, you know, you going through that, because when they do go to certain family members, like the mother, their parents and friends, they're tired of hearing this story, because
Mm.
they've tried to help them in those situations, get them out. They've even given them money, and, um, at certain times to buy food or to try to get away from the perpetrator. And they end up going back to them for whatever reason, and they have their reasons. And so the families and friends of the victim, they get tired. And so they, you know, that support kind of wears off a little bit, and then the perpetrator convinces them that, you see, they're not there for you. I'm the only
Right.
one here for you. And especially if they got into it with a family member or a friend, or they had a disagreement. And then the perpetrator is like, I told you they wasn't, for
Right.
you, they wasn't for us. And they convinced them. And at the time, you're high in emotion, thinking about, what just happened between you and the family member or friend, and you believe the perpetrator. So you stop going around these people. And then now he has you all to himself. And so he has all the power. You've given up, a lot of them give up their jobs. Like I said, they give up that power to, be able to go around their family and friends and get support, whether it be emotional, financial support, or just shelter away from him when he's acting like that. So
Yeah.
and unfortunately, we lose some people to domestic violence. And that's the sad part about it because you know, if you look at those cases individually, you see that there were years and years of domestic violence, and then years and years of grooming prior to them becoming physical, and then they use scare tactics. I'm gonna hurt you. If you try to leave me.
Right.
I'm gonna take the kids and you'll never see them again. Or I'm gonna kick you out. You're gonna be homeless. And some of them don't even have families to go back to, and
Because
so
they
they use
discriminate.
all these scare tactics to keep
Yeah.
them where they want them. And
Wow.
so,
And we do know, although there's all kind of situations of abuse where the perpetrator could be any gender, often what we most identify with is the female as a victim and the aggressor being her partner, which is most time some type of male. I said some type of male, but so when you said she and he, that's what we're referring to
right.
often. But it can be totally opposite. It can be
Yes.
he's a victim and um she is the batterer. And but this is so important because you know you gave a bunch of descriptions that really are red flags, because it does not usually start first date a slap on the face. Now
Mm-mm.
some people are crazy and they would do it, but it starts, not that these are necessarily things that would say this person would physically abuse you or abuse you, but I was really amazed in high school, not high school, college, that a young woman that I knew, she challenged me in my thinking, in that she had gone out on a date with a guy and they were disagreeing about something. They weren't arguing, but it was a disagreement. And she's like, okay, well, I'm just going to da da. And she walked away and he grabbed her arm. My silliness, I'm like, that's sort of romantic. He didn't want you to leave. And she was like, that was my first and last date because he decided whatever he was going to do, he was going to exercise control over me. And he got physical. And he doesn't like, and I just remember thinking, whoa, that's an amazing standard. Like that's peeping game before. Now he may not be a person who would have gotten into some type of intimate partner violence, but her standard was so high that it's like, no, no, you don't have permission to put your hands on me. And I just thought that's really good, because the red flags, you want the red flags while they're almost pink. The red, by the
Mhm.
time you get to the red flags, your heart's all involved, but it's like, how are you, or how are you with your time, or when I'm around you, do you always put down my family? because you don't want me to be around my family. And so even when you're talking about isolating from the support group, before we talked, I always thought about isolating support group from people. But if your support system includes you having a regular job, right? Or hanging out with your girlfriends on Friday, those are support systems. And if you find yourself in a relationship where the person is continually exercising power and control, you're going to do this, you're going to be here, and it's because I just love you and I don't want nobody else to mess with you, you just need me, you may want to consider like this is not healthy, and do it before you get all emotionally involved. And again, that's not to say that that person would definitely physically get involved with you, but it speaks volumes. And I just think that although this is not victim blaming and it is the batterer's fault, I think if our society would help people understand what are red flags and not make it so common to not just hit, but to touch people out, having no physical boundaries, I think a lot of women or other victims in domestic violence would understand that this is not acceptable. Like, this is not acceptable, like at all.
Right.
At all. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. I know I was dating someone, and this is more for next week's show, but we were talking about something, and he was like, "You would call the police on me?" I was like, if you was crazy enough to like slap me, hit me, whatever, yes, I call the police. Yeah, like what? Like, yes, like you would do me like that. I was so shocked. I was like, what do you mean, me do you like that? I'm like, you do me like that? I was like, no, I wouldn't hit you. But if something happened, I'm like, mm-mm. I said, better the police than the Demps brothers, because my dad and uncles will kill you. The police will just, carry you away. But just even understanding, really early on, like the kind of family I don't want to have. And I'm looking at the way you handle other situations, or maybe even having those discussions where people say, like, my mama, I had a friend also who said, my mama, yeah, dad would have to backhand her sometime because she had a lip, and they just kept talking. No, let's go back.
Right.
It's never acceptable to backhand.
And you know what? The whole thing starts with education, education in the homes, because I grew up, and I'm sure you did too, in the era where um, what goes on in the home stays in the home. That used to get preached all the time. So whether that be domestic violence, sexual violence, or whatever the case may be, you send a negative message to children, and then they, suppress whatever feelings that they have surrounding either one of those or any other issues of abuse. And then when they grow up, you know, they start to, I have a new motto that I have been trying to live by for years. I hate that term. Don't do as I do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
My motto is, don't tell me what to do, show me what to do. So if we can model, what a healthy family looks like, in terms of domestic violence, and teach our kids that it's not okay. It's not okay to yell at someone. It's not okay to put your hands on someone. It's not okay to intimidate someone or to use, to scare tactics like we talked about earlier. If we can teach these things early on, then we will produce healthier, mentally, emotionally, and psychologically healthier people.
I love that. That's actually a great transition. And we've already sort of compiled a number of these things and just sharing. And you're doing. Thank you so much for being on here, because it could almost sound so basic, but it is the truth. Um, This show is dedicated to ways to stop domestic violence, and I want to make it clear what I'm talking about is not victim blaming. This is not to equip those who may find themselves in domestic violence, right?
Right.
We are friends, ally, family members observing. Okay, so I just want you to understand this. So this does not have any self-defense classes attached or telling you to call 911. So when I'm saying ways to stop domestic violence, I'm really talking about a person who has had it disclosed to you, right? And so the first thing, or even just in general, you just said it, educate yourself. A lot of us don't know what functional looks like because we've been in dysfunctional families, or you know what functional look like and you assume everybody around you does. Like I assumed no one would just, without at least saying I'm just joking, that's not right, would ever admit that their dad backhanded their mom when she got enough lip. I was like, educated middle class people, even if they are involved or have family member who did that kind of stuff, I would think they would have enough social understanding that that's not good. So I'm like, gosh, this person needs to be educated. Hopefully that education would help, but it's never, I mean, spare the rod, spare the child, spare the rod, spoil the child.
Right.
But I don't see nothing in the word where it's like spare the rod, spoil the wife or the husband. It's like, you don't get to backhand me. That's not what submission is. So just educating yourself. And I think one thing that the community more of, and I hold myself accountable in the future. It's like, I think places that people trust discussions about family, whether it's school, and I know you do a number of fairs at different centers, the Department of Health, but also churches. What place, especially in the South and small communities, do people go when it comes to like, oh, I have an issue in my family? Our churches need to be educating people about right and wrong behavior when it comes to family disputes. And here's the truth. You got preachers who are beating their wives,
Right.
So I think that just making sure we keep it in a culture where we're saying all the same thing. This is not okay. This is not okay. And there's so many resources out there. You can just put in domestic violence and you can find out a lot. And then one other thing you shared about, here's another way that we can help stop domestic violence as a group, as a culture, as allies. We got to think critically about how media depicts domestic violence,
Right.
especially intimate partner violence. And, I'm not going to dwell on this a lot, but even in some of our music, it may not be what we're seeing, like depicted someone gets shot or hit, but our music sometimes, like especially rap, hip hop, can have some really violent lyrics in intimate partner. It's almost like they're not intimate partners, they just have sex. But I'm like, why? So you have kids listening to that and thinking of that. And, and I'm like, what is that saying about how you treat men, treat women treat men? That we should really think about that. What do you have any comments as to that?
Yeah. I want to bring up, my son is in a club called Boys to Kings, and they've been really doing some wonderful things with our boys in the community. I think we have now about 44 boys. And then they do enrollment. They have enrollment periods. But some of the lessons that they teach the boys is on domestic violence. It's on, how to treat women. They teach them on, like
That's
ethics.
wonderful.
Yeah, and how to, go back to being a gentleman, to women, opening doors, and taking them on dates, like going back, to some of the things that were good that we have gotten away from, when it comes to, teaching them about healthy relationships and how, a man should treat a woman and vice versa, how a woman should treat a man.
And this is called Boys to Kings.
Boys to
I think I've
Kings.
seen. I think I've seen something about that. And the participants are mostly Madison and Jefferson, or is
Well,
it a
actually,
Madison
Boys
program?
the King have extended some, like I know they even have they've started Boys the Kings in Africa.
Wow.
And so yeah.
So your son is a part of that. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So even our organizations, our civic organizations that have a captured audience like Boys to Kings or even sports, and like it's great opportunities while they're enjoying stuff to talk about this is how you treat one another. And
Mhm.
this goes to, I guess, the third way that I noted was champion respect and touching physical boundaries in your families. And in this case, in your civic organization, like it's not okay to put your hands on
Right.
people and teaching them at a young age. So before you get sexual with someone or before you married or having your
Mhm.
own children, you learn that there's boundaries. Like my mom and dad were really big on discipline me if I hit my brother. And I have been in other people's families where the oldest, was basically junior mama. Now, truthfully, I was not junior mama. So this is no, in those situations, that's fine. I was not junior mama. But I'm just like, I'm the oldest and he's not listening. So I'm going to hit him. And then my mom, I don't know if it was the best way to handle it, will hit me. But I can tell you on the good side that it taught me to respect physical boundaries with my brother, that I didn't have a right to spank him. As
Right.
parents may have a right. Not that we got spanked all that much, but champion respect. And this is really important too, because if you are in a family that and I know we're talking a lot, or at least that example is physical respect, right? But whether it's yelling at someone or picking at your siblings to the point that they are anxious and
Mhm.
depressed, like
Mhm.
we have to champion respect. It's just not good enough. People should be able to come home and find peace, and functional families do. A family should be a safe place. So that's
Right.
not just if you see physical boundaries, but boundaries where people are being disrespected. And of course, if you are a child in a family, that's harder for you to exert that kind of power. But wherever you may find yourself, you try to champion, in a way that doesn't make you potentially the next victim. But I just wanted to note that sometimes when we're trying to stop, things that are considered criminal, that, or like a lot of domestic violence, it becomes a law enforcement issue. But really it should start as a family issue. Like, what are our standards as a family? Is this how
Right.
we talk to each other? When we get mad, is this how we handle it? We hit each other. um and I think that starts at a young age.
Yeah, absolutely. Because those kids, they grow up, and how do they handle, and I was just talking, it's interesting that we're talking about this right now because I was just talking about it the other day with a client, and we were talking about how you learn certain behaviors when you're young, and then as you grow, and then you're watching your parents, how they handle situations between themselves, how they problem solve, how they you know um, work out things as a couple,
Yeah,
versus you know apart. And we were talking about how kids are watching even though you don't think that they're watching you.
that they
And
are.
then when they grow up, how what you taught them is what they're gonna mimic when they grow up. We become our parents in a way. We become our community. We become, the people that we grow up with, whatever you're around. And if there isn't someone there or isn't any boundaries like you spoke of earlier, you don't, and letting them know at that time, you don't put your hands on someone, if they didn't invite you to put your hands on them, you don't put your hands on them. And calling someone out their name, that's
Oof.
emotional scars that we create with children, when they're growing up, and They may not get spankings, but you got some parents that call it kids names, and they grow up and there's
That's
they
just what
have
happens.
a lot of them have low self-esteem. A lot of them, they grow up, they have families of their own, and then the cycle continues. Someone has to be, smart enough to say, enough is enough. This is not okay. You know, and again, going back to, like I say, my motto: don't tell me what to do, show me what to
Show
do.
me what to do. That is so huge. And I think if more people took this to heart, even if they didn't have the best models themselves, so much of what happens behind closed doors with families could be alleviated. And I do, really believe a lot of hurt people hurt people. So,
Yes.
we're going to have a hotline number for anyone to call who may find themselves in a situation and they really need someone to talk to or some help or services. I'll give that information at the end of our time here. But that's so important, championing. And yeah, name calling, learning how to disrespect someone who's
Hmm.
supposed to be your support. If you're a child calling your parents names, like that's someone you're supposed to respect. And if you learn to disrespect your mother, you're not going to respect the police. How are you going to
Right.
respect your spouse or your partner? Or how are you going to respect your children? So that's really important. Champion respect as well as touching and physical boundaries in your families. Don't laugh about domestic violence. And I admitted that I had already broken this ways, and I wrote this last week, in the sense of it is so easy, like we were talking about looking at media,
Hmm.
that people may say things and you like sometimes you have to like wait, what you just said, that is domestic violence. And let me tell you, this is it's not the same, but I there was a famous preacher, Juanita Bynum, her husband Bishop Weeks, stomped and beat her in a parking lot of a hotel. And I lived in Atlanta for over 26 years, and I really admire, and I still do, Juanita Bynum, and I admired her, what I thought was a fairy tale marriage. And they did conferences about marriage. Then I would see and watch their tapes and like, I'm prepared to get married. And I remember there was a story where they were arguing on the road and he kicked her out of the car. And she talks about how he had the nerve to put her Louis Vuitton suitcase in the dirt, and he drove off, and he didn't drive back. And they kept telling the story, and you know what? That for me was so like, what? I can't imagine Chester Demps getting so mad that he would leave my mom in the middle of nowhere and kick her stuff out. And it's like going back to domestic violence as power and control. So later, when I find out that he did what he did and he pled guilty to it, so this is not conjecture. I mean, he was charged with a felony. I was
Hmm.
like, you know what? If a man could kick you out of his car and drive away and leave you in the dust, that same man could beat your butt and not care.
Hmm.
Because not that you wouldn't get mad, but like that's you're there, in my opinion, as a partner in a relationship to cover and love. So even if you get mad, it should not be your an option to isolate and abandon and hurt your spouse. And so when I found out about that, it was like, ooh, my first thought was like, he did kick her out of his car and leave her in the middle of nowhere. And if you'll do that, then I don't trust that you won't keep me safe. So why I say don't laugh about domestic violence. In that moment, so many people laughed about him kicking her out. And I was like, you know what? Sometimes we need to take a beat and be like, is that mental abuse or financial abuse? Because there's so many issues of violence that deal with intimidation that has nothing to do with someone getting a backhand. And it's very easy to become desensitized by jokes and comedic references of domestic violence.
Right.
So this is something we all can aspire to, including myself, because there's some comedians out there who have you laughing about everything. But let's watch that. Let's watch, especially our children are looking at us, right?
Absolutely.
This next one, I know you could totally explain. Stop victim blaming. This is one way that, as a collective, we can help stop domestic violence abuse. Could you give an example, Pam, of victim blaming and why is it so hurtful and detrimental to trying to stop domestic violence in our culture being accepted?
Yeah. One situation is when, the police get called to a house, and and they've probably been to that house, maybe 3 or 4 times or a lot of times. And then they go back out maybe the third or fourth, fifth time. And then they look at the victim and they're like, why don't you, and some cops can be insensitive. Why don't you just leave? Why do you keep coming back to this? You know, and that's a form of re-traumatizing the victim, and then they get in this mindset that the police are not there for them,
Right,
and they tend to not call the police when they need to call the police, and because that there's this fear that
right.
if the police comes out, and then some police will say, if I come out again, I'm going to take
Somebody's
both
gonna
of
get
you to
arrested.
jail.
Yes. Okay. I
And
talked over.
I hear that
Say
all
that
the
again.
time.
Say that
And
again. There's some police
yeah,
say that if I come back out here, both y'all going to jail.
both of you going to jail. And someone who just got beat up by her or his, partner, and then the police come out there, and words are just as debilitating, and hurtful, and even sometimes more hurtful than the scars go away. You
Yes.
always remember that emotional and verbal hurt, what somebody say to you, what they did to you, and so for a cop to come out and say those things to a victim, is a form of blaming them for being hit, and no one deserves to be hit on or disrespected or embarrassed, in the way that, especially coming from somebody that's supposed to love them.
Supposed to love them. I tell you, one of the things that I've encountered being that now I'm doing restraining orders basically for victims and survivors of domestic violence primarily. And living in a small town, I'm still trying to get reacclimated to families, and I'll get a case and maybe I'll be at the hairdresser or the grocery store and I'll hear something and it sounds like potentially a case that I'm working with,
Mhm.
and or maybe I don't catch it right away. And then I'll hear something like, you know what, that person's always saying they being beaten, but they always get back together. And I'm like, well, it takes often a person 6 to 10 times to actually leave their abuser. Oh, well, when out, oh, you got to hit me once and I'm out of there. That's great. Congratulations for you. But let's not blame the victim. There's complex, intricate relationships that are not just so easy, whether it's the person who gave up their career and they're financially dependent on their batterer. If you're a child being beaten by your parent and
Mhm.
you're nervous because you don't want to go to foster care. If you're an
Right.
older person, like there's this famous story. I think the woman was 96 years old. She was called Miss Mary. She had a 47-year-old grandson who was willing to take her in. He stole her money. He basically did not give her all the things that she needed. And he got high one night and raped her. The reason why it was then at that point that she ended up disclosing, but all the abuse he had done, she hadn't disclosed because she felt, well, it's better to be here in my house than at a nursing home. So there's people who for certain reasons are like, they're not gonna come see you, Pam. They're not gonna come see me, or it's gonna take them a long time. So don't blame them. Do not,
Right.
and it's hard not to, especially I guess in the case of police officers, they keep going out to the same house. And I know domestic violence calls are often the more routine ways officers get shot and those type of things. But it's important. It's important to not victim blame. And I know it's easier said than done. We've already sort of discussed some of the grooming habits of domestic violence in the sense of that person who goes through this cycle of like, love bombing you, then controlling you, whether abuse mentally, physically, and then apologizing, and then honeymoon season, and a promise not to do it again and go back. That person is grooming you for just more and more power and control over you. So
Mm-hmm.
be careful about that. Even when you think about how, even though we're talking about domestic violence, but we think about the idea of, say, even pimp prostitutes, right? Like, and we'll talk probably more about this in the dating violence, but like love bomb you, but they're only doing that to control you, to make you do something else. And
Right.
um, that's often what people do. Let's go to this one. And I actually, Pam, I didn't talk to you about this because actually this was something I brought up last week as well. One ways that you can possibly help stop domestic violence is intervening as an active bystander. Okay, key note, this is not law enforcement. I told you, this is not self-defense. Active bystander. You know what a bystander is? A person who's standing by.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an acronym, C.A.R.E, that had these descriptions that can help. If you find yourself around, it could be at your family reunion, it could be out on the street and a family's coming out of Walmart. That C.A.R.E acronym is create a distraction, ask directly, rally others, and extend support. Here's an example, I think, and you could come up with an example. And I know we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but I think this may be a great opportunity. I know I've done it. I see a man, I'm driving, and I see a man hitting a woman. And I mean, I don't know if they're married, whatever. And I drove up next to them and like literally drove up. I wasn't thinking about this acronym. I was young. I was in high school still. I drove up, and the car coming up to them close was a distraction, so he let her go. And then I asked the woman, "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need to be taken somewhere?" And there were other people on the street. And so it says rallying others. You are not well, they call it save a hoe. You're not the savior here. But it's like, hey guys, is this woman? Do y'all know this woman? And like, ma'am, I'll take you where you want to go. Now whoever that was, I think it was her boyfriend, he was just yelling, yelling, yelling. And she ended up not taking me up on it. But that's an example of creating a distraction, asking the victim directly, what do they need? Because there was a situation where I don't know why I've had so many. I've run up on someone and they start cursing me out because that what I was doing would possibly result, that's what I'm guessing, would result possibly in that person getting their butt beat more when they get home. So
Mm-hmm.
it's important to ask, how can I help you? Like, you see a child getting what looks like severely beaten. Is like, oh ma'am, you have a pretty purse. That could be a distraction. Oh, thank you. How y'all doing today? Asking the little kids. Like, you don't have to be Inspector Gadget, but often when people are in public in particular, they're very cognizant when someone interrupts and they know that they're being watched. And
Right.
if they walk away to talk to someone like, hey, do you guys know that family? I'm really concerned. And any way that you can extend support, those may be ways, but I would say out of all the ways, the active bystander, you definitely want to be careful because again, you're not the police, but your extending support and rallying others may be a call to Department of Children and Family Services,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or the police. That's why I love that show. What is that show? What would you do? And they'll put scenarios because often you don't know what you'll do until you do it. And
Right.
the last one I'm gonna have you speak to is model healthy family interactions. You've already said it more than once. It's not about what you say, it's about what you do. So
Mm-hmm.
model that very thing. Let me ask you, what's your opinion about spanking, if you have one?
When it comes to punishment with kids, I have 3 kids of my own, and I feel as though, and I just told the client this today, let the punishment fit the behavior. Sometimes, as parents, we get, frustrated and aggravated. I don't like to spank my kid. If I believe in spanking, I don't like to spank my kids when I'm upset about something else. You
Yes.
know, it because people do believe in this whole cycle of discipline. You as you always want to talk to your kids. You always want
Always.
to reinforce what's right and what's wrong. Tell them, reinforce love. You love them. And also when it comes to the discipline, like I said, let the behavior fit the consequence, or the consequence fit the behavior.
I love
So,
that.
for
So
instance,
modeling
if
out.
they're acting out in school, okay, for a week, this is just an example. You're gonna come home, you're gonna do nothing but your homework after you clean up and do your chores. You're gonna do your homework, which they do your homework anyway, but you're not going out for playtime. So I may take away play, like going outside, take away their games, inside games and whatnot. So it's just coming up with consequences that will fit whatever that behavior is, and then what works for one child may not work for the other child. So you may you may have to come up with a whole another set of consequence. Not, you want to always be fair. You never want your kids to think that you love one better than the other, because
Right.
they or see that their consequence is lighter than theirs. And then reinforcement. When they do something good. This is all about teaching healthy communication, teaching them the right thing to do, but in praising when they do the right thing.
Yes, I love that. So modeling healthy family interactions, and I was asking her about spanking. What I hear you say, because the punishment fits the crime, also parents can be very creative in how to give discipline. Discipline is not just, and actually I think it should be like the least. Like you've exhausted all other measures,
Yeah.
unless they're a little kid and you're trying to get them to quickly know you can't run into the street, you can't touch, and they're not able yet to verbalize and understand.
Mhm.
But the older your children get, I would imagine the more you would want to use those things, taking
Yeah.
away. Like these are healthy ways to deal with stuff. Everything is not about being,
Yeah.
like you said, angry, upset. You don't want to punish your children angry. So those are
Right.
all really great. I put up on the screen a number of phone numbers that you guys feel free to take down. I thank our guest for being on. We're almost at an hour, and I know that she has some. I'm looking at the time. I know she has some to get out of here soon. But do you mind if I give them your email address?
Absolutely not.
So Pam works for Refuge House, and she as a domestic violence advocate for Taylor and Madison County. That is her email address. Also, at the bottom of the screen, we have our toll-free number for our, as well as Taylor County's hotline for Refuge House. You can call that number. They can also possibly redirect you to her services, or even mine if you need a restraining order, or you need the safety plan. Often the
Yeah.
legal part is the last thing. You need to just talk to someone. Like, I'm in a situation and I don't know what to do. Pam is wonderful, and she will hang in there
Thank
with
you.
you.
Oh,
She will hang in there with you. So, and there's no judgment. We're not telling you what to
no.
do. We're trying to collaborate with you to come up with options when it seems like there is no options. And often there are options. It just takes some maneuvering,
Mhm.
right, to do it.
Right.
So definitely give her a contact call, or excuse me, an email. I also put mine up there. I help give restraining orders at no charge. It's paid through a federal grant for Jefferson, Madison, and Taylor counties. Also, her work as a DV advocate is also at no charge to you. It's not free because it's being paid for, but our different clients do not have to be responsible for that. And so, as we leave this topic and Stoptober, stopping domestic violence, I just want to say that I know it's not an easy answer. I know it's not all nicely wrapped up in the way that we would want it to be, but you're not, if you are a victim, there is hope.
Yes.
There are people who will help you. They will help you confidentially. They will help you at your pace. Um, and if you're a person who knows someone or become aware of someone dealing with domestic violence, these are ways that you can help. And we've talked and shown in a lot of different stuff, and this is only an hour show. We're going over a little bit, but I think one great thing is to know that you're not the savior. So if you know someone, ask them what they need, because maybe what they need is someone just to call and check on them. Maybe you need a word that's like, oh, I want to get pizza, which is a sign that you're dealing with domestic violence. There's so many things that cannot all be wrapped up in this little time. So please, please, please contact either one of us if you are in need or want to hear more. And also, if you're in Taylor County, get Friday's paper, because our very own Pam Moore it has an article that gives more information that you can follow up. Pam, I will leave you with the last word. What, if anything, would you like to share with our audience regarding stopping domestic violence or anything that we've talked about today?
Well, like you have mentioned a little bit of early on, when if you see it, we're obligated as sisters and brothers in our community to do something about it, whether that be, like you said, intervene in some of the ways we've already discussed. Um, Calling the police may be one, or giving them information about refuge house, so that they can, call for themselves, when it's a time that's safe for them to call.
Right.
So, it's again sitting back and not doing anything, when you see somebody being, hurt, we I don't even know how we can feel good about it. We're obligated as citizens to do something about it. Whether
We
you
are.
call the police or lead them to the nearest shelter, and we do have shelter in Taylor County, Perry, and one in Tallahassee as well. And like Hope said at the beginning of this video, we serve 8 counties, but we have 2 shelters, and that 24-hour hotline could lead you to whatever help or shelter that you need to go to. You
Well,
can check
Pam,
availability with
well,
that
thank you so
hotline.
much. Thank you so much. It's
You're
so
welcome.
much. And I just encourage everyone during this Domestic Violence Awareness Month. The whole purpose is to become more aware, that hopefully you've learned a little bit of something, or you're reminded a little something that can hopefully help someone or yourself along the way. Pam, if you would stay on, I would love to say goodbye to you. As after I say goodbye to my Hope More family, thank you so much for coming. The light is coming in and having my body. I'm like 2 shades lighter. I'm as light as Pam is right now. Thank you all so much. And join us next week for our discussion on dating violence. And then the last Wednesday, we'll be dealing with stalking. In fact, I'm going to be telling a little bit of my business. Yeah, that's just a sneak peek, because I myself am and have been dealing with a stalker. So that's just a little tease, but come back in this time that we're celebrating STOPtober. Bye bye, and have a wonderful, wonderful hump day, or as I call it, hope day, because we don't do humps around here.